So let's start with silent prayer. Amen. Okay, so happy Sabbath, everyone. So I have decided to go to presentations which were done in 2020. Of course, by now we have more information. So when the presentations were done, it was towards the end of 2020. So we were at Increase of Knowledge. We were at Jacob's Time of Troubles. So since then, the message developed so much more. So it was 8 presentations. So I'm going to follow one thought through the presentations. Otherwise, there was presented much more. So Elder Testament there through ancient time, revolutions, cause and effect, Concord into the details, starting with that of George Floyd. She went into 2 streams of informations, discussing the good sources and bad sources. So yeah, but I'm going to follow just one thought through it. I will try to don't take it out of context. Feel free to correct me if I do so. So yeah, so I thought it would be just good to go through some of the old presentations, also because of the time in which we were at that time. So we will start with something quite easy. We will start with Eden, creation, and second Advent recreation. So if I can ask someone, I'm not going to see chat. I will try to check it time to time, but yeah, as I said, I have a notes on the laptop, so I'm not going to see chat much. So if someone could, you can't see it much, isn't it? Yeah, if someone could just tell me Eden to Eden line, if someone, the line of restoration, the day marks and everything. Okay.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
It starts with Eve, then Cain, and
And Ham.
That's it. I can't really remember.
Do you remember what courses happened? What has happened? So what has happened with Eve? Actually,
It was with Eve wanting to experience freedom that caused her to sin.
What was the course? What was the so it was cause and effect. She chose the freedom, and so what was the curse? Yeah.
Inequality.
Sexism.
Sexism. What about with Cain?
False worship.
And Ham?
Slavery.
Slavery. Thank you. Okay, so And we know it is chiastic structure, so it's a narrow structure. So then could start dealing with this curses. So someone can tell me how it carry on. What was the first curse which was dealt with, and what year? Anyone?
Slavery in America? Sorry, I couldn't hear that last question. I think you're going for the next one.
What year was it?
1850. Are you going to put 1850?
1850? No?
1863.
63? I don't know.
Yeah.
63, 1798. You could pick a few.
I wanted to start like with 1798.
1798. I was going to say 1798.
Yeah, and since then, yeah. What about the other remark?
The race? That's race.
That's Sabbath,
Sabbath.
1888.
About Sunday issue, 1888. Perfect. Thank you. And the last one.
Sexism. 1989. Sexism.
Sexism, 1989. Okay. So here we have a Eden creation. And here we have a recreation at the second advent. Great. So, thank you very much. So we will start with creation and recreation. So we will look at that. So we will look at first at the second advent, the recreation. So when we receive our physical new bodies, are they fully developed in form and size? No. The bodies won't be fully formed at our recreation. We will grow in that 1,000 times year period in our physical bodies. God will create us shorter and we will grow. That's the physical body. Then if we come to the character, when people will raise from the graves, are they raised a nicer people than when they went down? No, the same way. The person goes down, the same way they come up. So we will not be suddenly more tolerant or patient. Some people maybe can't wait to get to heaven and play some instruments, but God's not going to people touch and immediately they're not going to start playing. So if it's hard work here, it will be hard work there as well. So we will get new perfect bodies, but there is still a work to do. Mind, character, and personality the same. Talent the same. So that is the creation here at the second advent. And if God is that hard parent that he makes us learn, what about God as a parent in the first creation? How were Adam and Eve created? Physically, in their understanding of the character of God, in their skills and abilities. So we will look at quote now. It's a short quote, so I'm not going to be posting it. It's August 1st, 1900, The Advocate. He who taught Adam and Eve in Eden how to tend the garden would instruct men today. So, were they created and suddenly knew how to garden? No, they knew nothing about gardening. They were created like a child. They had to learn. So God taught them how to run a garden, how to take a physical care of themselves. So they did not know these things when they were created. Did God created Adam knowing he was lonely? No, he was created. Then God set up a series of experiences through which he would feel what loneliness felt like. So God did not create that in birth. They had to learn. So God set up a series of experiences. Okay, so now we will go into quote. I'm going to post it in chat, and if someone could read it, please. And if someone has some comment, would like to add to it something, feel free to do so, please. Right. And if someone could read that for me, please.
Adam and Eve received knowledge through direct communion with God, and they learned of him through his works. All created things in their original perfection were an expression of the thought of God. To Adam and Eve, nature was teeming with divine wisdom, but by transgression, the human family was cut off from learning of God through direct communion, and to a great degree through his works. Upon every page of the great volume of his created works may still be traced his handwriting. Nature still speaks of her creator, yet these revelations are partial and imperfect, and in our fallen state with weakened powers and restricted vision, we are incapable of interpreting aright. We need the fuller revelation of himself that God has given in his written word.
Thank you, Samai. So this was CTR 19.2. So they were created not knowing. They do not know of God and character. They will have to go through systematic education to understand how to operate the external world, how to understand themselves and how to understand God. So that also reminds me studies done by Elder Parmenter about relationships in Portugal, that through relationships we can know and understand God better. So we did get message of equality today by Elder Tess. We were in Jacob's trouble, where many didn't even understand themselves. Message then grew. We started to understand how to treat people around us, building empathy, listening people's experiences, having our own experiences, keep educating ourselves, and we see that. So we see through that, through the relationships in our lives, we learn how to treat people around us, and we understand better God, understand better the character of God, what he loves, what he hates, what breaking his heart, what broke his heart at cross and that stuff. So yeah, so but by transgression, the human family was cut off from learning of God through direct communion, and to a great degree through his work. So they had the opportunity to learn directly from God until sin arrived. I first asked before I carry on, would someone like to add something to it, have some questions or something so far?
What does it mean when it says these revelations were partial and imperfect?
Let me see where. Let me find it 1 second. Is it in the quote?
It says on the top, all created things in the original perfection were an expression of the thought of God. Then further down the line, it says, yet these revelations are
Perfect.
partial and imperfect. Is it talking about nature or,
Yeah, the context, the sentence before is nature, isn't it?
right? So it's talking about that.
I think so. Yeah, nature still speaks of her creator, yet these revelations are partial and imperfect. Yeah, as Curtis says, I think that's addressing the effect of sin on nature. So we see, animals killing each other. We see trees dying. It's not a perfect reflection. Is that how you see it, Magda?
Yes, yes. Yes. Thank you. So they had the opportunity to learn directly from God until sin arrived. So they were created with no knowledge, have short time frame of direct communication with God. Sin arrives and destroys everything. So Satan makes it his sole purpose to misinterpret the character of God to humanity. In the very first next generation, he has done this to such a degree that 2 children of the so-called perfect parents have killed the other with no guilt. So what kind of conditions were they in a time period of direct communication with God for about a year? Understand they weren't affected by sin, but the disciples had 3.5 years of direct daily communion with God. So here is kind of like compare and contrast, like Adam and Eve were for about a year with direct communion with God, communication, sorry. And then other test goes into the disciples, where they were about 3.5 years daily in direct communication with God. How much progress has Peter made in 3.5 years? He has made quite a big progress, but far from immortal, far from what you and I would even call nice. And I think we think if you and I had 3.5 years following Jesus, we would be perfect. We would be really nice people. All our doctrine sorted out, completely loyal to the Son of God. He fed 5,000 people. He ended his time on earth, left with enough people to squeeze in one upper room. And they were far from nice. So we see here the compare and contrast with how Adam and Eve learned for 1 year directly, where disciples for 3.5 years, and they still were not perfect. So Adam and Eve were created. They don't understand the character of God. They don't know how to garden. So they are going to learn how to garden.
Magda, when you bring up Peter spending time with Christ for 3.5 years and Adam and Eve spending time with God for however long they did, it brings to mind scenarios where I've had conversations with people, related to the message, and they come back to me and say, I'll just wait to heaven for God to tell me what the right answer is, and I think the point that you've just made just shows how people underestimate how entrenched their beliefs actually are about a certain thing, and that this idea that if you just had God to tell you what the right answer is, you'd be okay, you'd change your mind like that. But as you've shown, took Peter a long time to change his character from being this rash person that Jesus found him to be. I mean, all the disciples, it took them a long time to go through this journey, and yet they had direct communion. So this idea that we're going to get to heaven and God's just going to give us all the right answers and we'll have everything sorted out on day one, underplays how much sin has infected us, or at least shaped our beliefs and our worldviews and etc. I mean, it's taken us how long to sort out sexism in the movement, and we haven't even sorted it out. It's been what, 5 years now? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis. Yeah, exactly. That's the point I'm making. And also, Adam and Eve, that was still even before the sin happened, where with disciples, it's already, of course, after a good few thousands of sin. Thank you for that input, Curtis. So yeah. So yeah, so they have to learn everything from scratch. Loneliness, character of God, everything, their innocence, blank whiteboard. Then they are expected to learn. They are going to be taught how to garden, that they need each other, taught what God is like, and that experience was never to end, but it is quickly cut off, their education. And you have sexism, and soon after racism enter into the human experience, and you have nearly 2,000 years before Genesis is written. And when those things become codified, by the time it is written, it will be that perspective in mind, where you don't have named any daughters, Noah's sons, we know they are there, but what's the name of Noah's wife? We don't know names of daughters, Noah's wives. So we see that this is codified in after 2,000 years already in the writings. Sinful experience becomes codified in words. So they were meant to be learning still without sin. 6,000 years later, if they were still alive today, they would still be learning, but without sin. So God is having to do the same thing he originally intended, with much greater difficulty in the middle of the war. If we understand the subject of dispensationalism, such a thought will come as no surprise. But what we can tend to do is get confused that somehow everything was perfect back in the garden, that they had a complete understanding. Elder Tess says, my parents may not be perfect, but my sister and I are not going to kill each other. Something went wrong, very bad and very quickly. It took one generation, the brutality, the extended brutality to take the life of Abel. It took 6,000 years of progression. People say, God never changes. That's right. What we forget is the people he is speaking to do change. So God never changes, but we're forgetting that the people he is speaking to do change. The problem that people have is that they believe in a literal to literal reading, and they want to go back to Moses' time and say God never changes, and want to say that is good enough for me. Problem is he expects a lot more from you than he did from them. So God expecting much more from us than from them. So yeah, so we know that consistency is important, and you don't have that with literal reading, without rules, without methodology. So Leviticus 25:35. This passage talks about slavery. People quote this to show it was all meant to be nice. After 6 years, you go free. You can't hurt your slaves. Don't deal harshly with them. They forget verses 44 to 46. Don't rule fellow Israels harshly. But those other nations, they will be slaves forever. they never go free. The 10 commandments are Exodus 20, chapter 21, is laws about slaves. And while people acknowledge that much of this is over, for the time period, it was revolutionary, that you would be told to be nice to your slaves. Those Israelite slaves can go free. Verse 7 says, if a man sells his daughter, she won't go out like the men do. Talking about father selling his daughter to be an extra wife to a man practicing polygamy. We have slavery and polygamy. So that's just after 10 Commandments, the next chapter. What the USA said was slavery was good enough for them. It is good enough for us. Today, they say the Constitution applies to us. We have to treat citizens of USA after the dictates of the Constitution. That's something what we're discussing at the Bible study, how we're reading about the originalism. But when they are performing war crimes in Afghanistan or for the family that they bomb in Syria, the Constitution doesn't apply to them. The rules change. And in today's message, do we find that acceptable? No. The only way you can read and see consistency from Exodus to Ellen White is recognizing that while God does not change, his expectation of you and I do. After 6,000 years, God is teaching us of his character, but in the environment of sin that impacts that. In the environment of sin, the threat that has been planned by Satan is that he will misrepresent the character of God. So in time of Moses, they understood a little of the character of God. And even that little was too much for them. So it should not have been, but as he lays out his instruction in Exodus, the problem with people is they are molded after the mindset of Egypt. So God is not just trying to teach them of his character, but then imprint his character onto them. And they rebel against that with the apis bull, with the idolatry. So we see here the progression. We see that while God's not changing, there is more expectations of us. We see that God is teaching us his character in the 6,000 years. And now we are in Egypt, where God was trying to teach them and imprint his character on them, and they rebelled against it. So apis bull, idolatry. So it has two forms. It's a character and form. So each of them, so we have a physical form and we have a character, the mind. So we know over the time they lose the form of idolatry, but the mindset of paganism stays with them. So when Jesus comes and walks on earth, they do not recognize him. Okay, so we're coming soon on a bit more our time. So I will share one more quote if someone.
Magda, I think that's that point you made about, you made it earlier on about how after 2,000 years, Moses is writing that from that perspective after 2,000 years of that viewpoint. And when you said there about, and people hold on to so strongly to their ideas about things, apis bull is a good example of how long it takes to get rid of that picture. And yet I don't think before this message, obviously, we didn't look at the Bible writers as in the context of the time they're writing, so that they're just as damaged by their worldview and their viewpoint of God as the people they're writing for. So when you said that the Israelites, they can't even bear what he does show them. And in Exodus 20, you've got the commandments, and the next chapter is slavery and polygamy, and they're not letting go of that, and I guess they're not ready to let go of that. So God doesn't even try to attempt to make them let go of that, because they're so entrenched in their viewpoint. And Moses is a product of that generation, so he's still got all that baggage as well. And I think when you see how long it takes to change a human mindset, it's really quite incredible how long that process takes, I think. And we're seeing that in our generation with sexism. We know it's so difficult to get people to change their viewpoint. That's why it's miraculous, this movement, really, that so many people have changed their viewpoint. Although what you're saying now about the Israelites, they changed some of it, but it's not really all gone. Even when Moses gets there, they're not really practicing in their mentality so that they're ready for Christ to come. And I think that I was talking to someone this week about this, about conspiracy theories, and how this has been said before, that, you present people with evidence, like you said about Jesus walking the earth, you've got God in front of them, and you can present evidence that, say COVID isn't real. If someone believes that COVID isn't real, they're not going to wear the mask, no matter how much evidence you show them, because their emotions are attached to that theory and they don't want to let go of it. And so it's just entrenched in, even evidence won't do it. So, and this is why when Christ says, though one rose from the dead, they're not going to believe, because they don't want to. And I think it's that you can give all this information to people, but they don't want it and they don't want to change. It doesn't matter how much you present. And I think that problem that God's got it's just huge, how he has to pull us from where we don't want to be pulled from, because they're comfortable in many ways in Egypt with Apis Bull, with the whole theology, and he's got to pull them from A to B, and it's just a massive battle all the time. And I think when you're a parent, you see that with children, that when we recognize the Bible's written from the perspective of the children, not from the adult, I think that's quite profound, that realization.
Thank you for that, Emma. Yeah, and we will go in this presentation a bit more into what's happening now into our time.
So
As
Magda, can I ask a question
Mhm.
to you or Emma? It's just off the back of the comment that Emma made. That I was thinking about this and how I've myself, what made me accept the message when it came specifically. And Emma mentioned that no matter how much evidence you give to certain individuals, they'll never change their course. And so I was thinking of myself, was it really evidence that changed my approach, or was there an inkling already that lent that way? I don't know what the answer is for myself. I guess I have to think about that more thoroughly. But just with people in general, it may be an answer that is person specific, but more broadly, do we think that for people in general, there's already an inkling to lean a certain way, and then some evidence comes to push you over that edge? Like, how much do people really sway from one end in true, genuine belief, and then get swayed by evidence or the logic that's presented in the support of equality and etc.? Like, it's just a question on how difficult it is to change people's minds, and if our minds were really changed because of evidence, or there was a subtle belief of the things already within us. I don't know.
Yeah, can I respond to that? You have a thought, Michael?
Yeah, you can go. I can go.
I was thinking that when you were speaking there, I was thinking there's so many things that come to mind, like chicken and egg and nature, nurture. All these things play a part. Both things play a part. So evidence and the person's leaning towards it, and which one comes first, and how much is influenced by the other one. It also reminds me of the sealing, or even the conversion experience, that you can't trace everybody's conversion in the same way. But there has to be both there, I think, because the sealing is the settling into the truth intellectually and spiritually. So there has to be some knowledge, which I see as the intellect part, and there has to be a willingness on the person's part to have an experience, to change their experience, to want it. So I don't know whether
so then,
the same. Go on.
Is that like the intellectual part? That's the only thing that we can bring to a person, with an asterisk, I assume. That we can bring them, the evidence of something. Whose job is it then, for that underlying belief? Because then you would say some people are at an advantage or not an advocate? Who plays that role, I guess, in changing that underlying belief? Do we say, God, you didn't do a good enough job to prepare this person for the message that I'm giving them? Like, yeah.
That goes back to the question we can't answer is why some people choose and some
Yeah.
people don't, isn't it?
True.
I think you
I
were
think- I
asking
think-
that all.
Don't you think it's about the teacher, whoever's teaching them?
Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's as simple as saying that some people just refuse and some people just accept. I think it's more complicated than that. I think a lot of responsibility is on the person who's sharing the truth, how they do it, what they do. So like what Curtis was saying, like God hasn't prepared this person to receive the truth, but he works in his people to prepare that person for that. So when you look at Christ, for example, he'd go around and he'd be healing and doing all these things to prepare people's hearts to receive. And even with the disciples, he did a lot of things for the disciples so that their faith would be strengthened. So I think there's a couple of different categories. That there's places where people reject things regardless of what's been done for them, but then other people also reject because of how things have been said. They've been rejected maybe because of what the teacher has done. For example, the experiences that there's like William Miller, for example, he rejected the truth because of the people around him, and God is going to hold them accountable. So I think it's yeah, I think it's complicated. It's difficult. You can't look at it as one situation, in my opinion, and say, okay, it's because this person just rejected it. Because I think a lot of times we can also let go of that responsibility and kind of put it on okay, God didn't prepare this person or whatever, but we didn't do the work to prepare them. And vice versa. Even when we came here, I think about my experience, like even just becoming an Adventist. It was a mix. There's the person who helped me become an Adventist. They prepared the soil beforehand by just how they'd treat me, how they spoke. They were just different, the way they acted and how they treated me, and then I knew I could be open and vulnerable with this person and feel like they're there for my good, so I could go and ask them questions when I had questions, and that's how it came. So yeah, I think that's my take. And as well, I think you need a mix, as Emma said. I think you need a mix of reason and faith. We have evidences, or I don't know if that's the right word. We have these evidences or these tokens of these things of the scripture. You follow the scripture. Like we come here through Bible study and reasoning, through Daniel, through Revelation. We didn't just kind of just like, yeah. Otherwise, you'll accept anything if you just do that.
Yeah, I appreciate, the nuances that every individual faces. The driver behind my question is just that it feels so hopeless, for someone who grows up in a deeply conservative environment, whose mind has been shaped so much to think a certain way, and they entrenched in that, compared to someone who grows up in a Adventist, but in a more liberal setting. They are two different stages, and then they both approached by the same message, and the expectation is that they both accept that same message in the same way, but they've had different upbringings. So yeah, I don't know what my point is. But anyway, yeah.
I think you had that questions. I think you asked us, I think that was me and Emma, about the same kind of like, why did we accept it and stuff? How did that happen? So I think it goes, yeah, I think you still, yeah, but everyone has a different experiences. Experience plays their big role as well. Often when people growing up in conservative families, they're just absolutely against it then. Yeah. Thank you, Curtis, for your question and everyone's input. me a few minutes. Okay, so okay, yeah, we will read this paragraph. I'm going to post it. It's Christ Object Lessons 34.4. And if someone would be willing to read it, please. It doesn't copy. Maybe it's long.
It's probably because it's too long, Magda. Is it long? Just
Parts, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so Sam can read it, please. Debbie, could you read that, please?
Me? Did you say Debbie?
I said Debbie, yeah. Or just anyone?
I could do the first bit.
Sorry, can I read?
Yes, please.
Okay, which says Christ's mission was not understood by the people of his time. The manner of his coming was not in accordance with their expectations. The Lord Jesus was the foundation of the whole Jewish economy. Its imposing services were of divine appointment. They were designed to teach the people that at the time appointed one would come to whom those ceremonies pointed. But the Jews had exalted the forms and ceremonies and had lost sight of their object. The traditions, maxims, and enhancements of men hid from them the lessons which God intended to convey. The maxims and traditions became an obstacle to their understanding and practice of true religion. And when the reality came in the person of Christ, they did not recognize him. They did not recognize in him the fulfillment of all their types, the substance of all their shadows. They rejected the antitype and clung to their types and useless ceremonies. The Son of God had come, but they continued to ask for a sign. The message, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. They answered by demands for a miracle. Matthew 3 verse 2. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. The gospel of Christ was a stumbling block to them because they demanded signs instead of a savior. They expected the Messiah to prove his claims by mighty deeds of conquest, to establish his empire on the ruins of earthly kingdoms. This expectation Christ answered in the parable of the sower, not by force of arms, not by violent interpositions was the kingdom of God to prevail, but by the implanting of a new principle in the hearts of men.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I want to focus on just few points in this. So we see that these maxims and traditions became an obstacle because they interpreted these practices with the mindset of pagan. The gospel of Christ was a stumbling block to them because they demanded signs instead of a savior. Which one did people prefer? They preferred signs, but God said that they need a savior. So then Elder Tess, speaking about the pandemic, many people feel like they have been failed because there was the prediction of pandemic. But was that needed? It would be nice, something to hold out to Adventism and say, see, we told you so. It would have been nice sign, but the message when it comes may not have been what you wanted, a sign in advance. What you were seeing is what you needed it. And what you needed it is to vaccinate your children, to let go of your conspiracy theories, to let go of your ideas of a deep state, to trust the medical establishment. God does not care about the sign. God cares about your mind. So yeah, here Elder Tess goes into the our mind, apostate Protestantism, the conspiracy theories. So when it comes to idolatry, there is the form and the mind. They lost the form, but they held onto the mind. When we get into our history, when it comes to equality, again, there is a form and there is the mind of it. The character and heart of equality and accepting the form. So in 2019, a form was announced. Women being elders, trousers. There is a rejection of nationality, nationalism, women in leadership across the world, women rising up and teaching across the world field. This movement is instituted in new form. For many people, this was too much. So the issue we are facing, in 2020 we were facing, is not the form of equality, but the mind. So to compare and contrast, idolatry and equality, the form and the mind. With idolatry, they lost the form and held on the mind, onto the mind. That is error. With the true, took the form, but not the mind. So yeah, so with idolatry, they did lose the form and kept the mind, the wrong thinking, the errors, the wrong worldview, but with the true, you take the form. But with true, they didn't take the form, but they took the form, but not the mind. Sorry, good time gotten it.
Would you say, Magda, that's what we're doing then with the fact that we accepted, or on a surface, we accepted trousers, we accepted the vaccinations, we wore the mask, we did all the form, but our minds is the struggling.
Yes, and
that we're struggling with.
Yes, and I'm going to go into this a bit more into depth.
Just comment on that quote about Christ, and I think that's the really scary part. I think for me that in that quote they basically held on. They made a God in their own image. That's what they did. They held on to what they wanted God to be like, and so everything they heard, they interpreted through that filter of this is what we want God to be like. So he would want him to be apispal, the general that overthrow the other nations. And it was all about them, not about other people, because it was about glorious Israel was going to be, how good they were going to be, how on top of the world, how powerful. And we've got the same issue. Humanity has the same problem that we see, that everything we hear, we're interpreting through our own version of God. So each of us have that version of God, in our own heads, which we're struggling to get rid of, and all of us don't see it the same way because of our background, because of our, our experience. That our view of God it's been shaped into a certain pattern that when we hear something, we'll interpret it through those glasses. So it's really hard to change that mindset, because you literally need a brain transplant, because the way you've seen everything is so shifting so fast and so hard, and they just couldn't take it because they didn't want God to be like that. They wanted it to be like the one they had created in their own head. And each of us have got that still, even though we're all in the same movement, we've all supposedly got the same ideas about things, but everyone's still looking at God in their own way, and that's at various stages on the line, I think, which is scary, because you think you understand things, or you've got some concept of what the truth is, and it may be quite far off. Well, and we've seen with the Israelites it was far off, and how hard it was to change them, the disciples, their whole experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we will look into that a bit more. So this movement has the form of equality, but many of us have the mind of inequality. So it is test of the mind. And the form has implications for how we think and live. It is one thing to say women are equal. It is one thing to put a woman on a board, make her a leader, have her teach, have her run your school. It is another thing to empower her and treat her with respect when she does. So I will add to this. So further down, Elder Tess was speaking about pastors' wives when they are preaching, how they are being vulnerable, and they have to think, they speak about their personal issues and that stuff. And so the man says, I will be quoting Elder Tess. They will say, I'm not sexist. Look how much I encourage the sisters to teach and lead. My wife is shy, I inspire her. And then they have a boss, not referring to, Elder Tess not referring to herself, but they end up with a boss who is a woman. And all of a sudden, there is a problem. Why do they find a problem? Because she is not vulnerable, warrior, wife of evangelical pastor. No one expected Elder Jeff to show his heart, to find him likable. Trump has no problem looking down at vulnerable women and saying, I believe in equality, I care about you. But when he looks at Clinton or Kamala Harris, his favorite word is nasty. They are not likable. He does not say that about men, because the issue with women is if they are not vulnerable, they are not likable. No one digs into Elder Parminder's past to feel they can relate to him before they like him. Many men are fine with this arrangement, and it looks like they are doing a good job with equality. And the danger is now we have women up here who are not vulnerable, and if they are, they may not feel the need to tell you. And whether this is in schools, no one felt they had to have Elder Gabriel's story before they showed him respect, whether local boards or continental leaders, unless there is an evidence of vulnerability. They are not liked. Elder Tess says, I can tend to speak about my past, and I know there are women who can be helped by that. It can help give context, but I don't want any woman in the movement to think that she needs to show vulnerability, to have respect to lead. And the changes to the form, when you have women leading, it brings a crisis, when the form has changed and not the spirit. So yeah, so here Elder Tess goes deeper into how it looks when you have only form and not the spirit, how you accepting someone until you, I would almost say until you breaking the sexism, what they expecting of you as a woman. Yeah. Someone would like to add something to this? And I think we will still go a bit more into it. So in the pandemic, restrictions and masks being against, so lots of people being against it, and it's because people are deep neck and idolatrous. People need to come out of apostate Protestantism. So conspiracy theories, vaccinations, libertarianism, idolatry, like at that time when this was presented, we didn't have that much information, but now we have so much more information with the freedom and equality, libertarianism and stuff. We understand much more. As the Jews of old, there's a blindness problem. Signs are nice, we can tolerate the form, we may even think it is beautiful until we say you have a female boss. Then every place that has a female leader, all of a sudden people start to struggle. God prepared us just in time with our understanding of the medical system of vaccinations and the conspiracy theories. Because when it comes to COVID-19, the medical system, the conspiracy theories come in like a flood. They've destroyed Levites and Nethanims. God built us an ark with the message of conspiracy theories. And of course, because before you call anyone out of the city, what do you have to do? You have to leave it yourself. So the form is the easy part coming out, but the mindset is the hard part. The mindset of apostate Protestantism. The perspective and worldview of apostate Protestantism, and what they particularly believe in beyond the conspiracy theories, beyond their views of the medical establishment, beyond their views of religious freedom, beyond their views of capitalism, all of which we invited, is their views of equality. The methodology they use in inspiration to justify their inequality. So just as idolatry has the form and the spirit, we find we have the we come to the truth and it has a form and the spirit as well. Okay, so I will be mostly now quoting Elder Tess, which I already do. Yeah, so, and if someone wants to add something, please do so. So far, everything is clear. Would someone to add something to it? Okay. So, Alberta says, I want to make a point that I did not make. I know I beat up the man. We are all familiar with Ben Carson, my childhood hero. Trump put him in charge of housing. So Ben Carson, he fights through institutional racism, not just in people's treatment of him, but through the redlining that affected his whole upbringing. The system of housing that affected the Black communities. The schools he had access to, he fought all against that to be greatly successful, to become a good Republican. And what is his approach to all his suffering? He turns to Black Lives Matter protesters, says, it is not that bad. look at my inspirational story. I had to fight through all that, so you do too. Instead of lifting them up and making their paths easier than he had to walk through, he says he sees them as lazy. They have the opportunity. They have the opportunities, he would say. I was successful. If they just work harder, they will be successful as well. He fails to show the care and respect to his own group of people. I want to make a call to the women in this movement. You can compare and contrast two women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and who else? Amy Coney Barrett. The notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg and infamous ACB, two women. Both of them have fought institutional sexism. Both of them are going to do very different things for women. It is external parable we are seeing played out internally. When those women, pastors' wives, stands up and talk and open up about the eating disorder they had as a child. To all these women, we need them in the organizational hierarchy. Are they trying to get the respect of men or the women? The men probably aren't even listening, but the women are who are saying, "Oh God, sorry, sorry." I heard as a child. You heard too. I feel vulnerable and weak. I'm glad my boss is, so I don't feel like there is a strong woman who is better than me or over me. They open up their vulnerability for the respect of other women. And you can see externally that one of these issues they are facing is that there are women on both sides of the political spectrum representing two different mindsets. So it isn't just men who need to learn how to respect the women in leadership. It is the women. Just like you see it with Ben Carson and Amy Barrett, you have two different examples, and it is compare and contrast. We should apply to this to the movement. How do women handle a woman boss? From a distance, they may like me. It is never the boss who is over your boss. It is the one who impacts your daily life. And women are battling their own sexism. Okay, so there was quite a lot. So Alberta is here comparing and contrasting to women. So she's talking about Ben Carson, who actually not really having empathy for people, not making it any easier for them. Yeah. And then when you look at also at Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Amy Coney Barrett, so you see that one actually building women up, fighting for them, and they both had to get to the place which is really hard to get for women, and they're just taking absolutely different mindsets and ways. So the vast majority of women vote Democrat. There is a distinction between men and women in US politics. There are too many examples of women that stand with Trump. For the sisters of this movement to not take this as a warning, it was the women who thought Hillary Clinton was nasty. We have no rain in the harvest, and we should be glad for that because we would not be able to handle the rain. But as I said, there is a loophole. We will come back to this later. So, yeah. So we see that this issue having women as well, and have to change the spirit as well. Right? Would someone like to add something to this?
just want to clarify what you said about the women. So I think, are you saying that the women, if a woman doesn't show herself vulnerable, that other women don't respect her?
Yeah. So
So
yes,
expectation on our part as women.
yeah, it is the fact that we still expecting of women being certain way, being vulnerable, being. So if you know that way, I think it's from both part, but from women part as well. You're not accepted, you're not likable, you're not.
I'm just wondering why that is, you know. I don't know if it's because, I don't know if you've got thoughts about why that is with women seeing women that way, that we don't like to see a strong woman who doesn't show herself vulnerable, because that's what we expect women to do, is show that vulnerability so we can identify with them, with our own vulnerability, or whether it's because there's a jealousy thing going on there. We don't want to see strong women who are better than us, because there's that long-standing competition between women that about objectification, for instance, like the beautiful, we have to be the most beautiful, or there's a competition amongst people to be the most beautiful, that we dress for women, not really for men, that idea. I don't know
which is quite dangerous, because we meant to be lifting each other up and helping each other, and that's, I think, what she's showing with Ben Carson, what he does do.
Yeah, there's that idea, I think, with the Ben Carson. Yeah, so he's a black man, gets to the top and says, I've made it, you should be able to do it. And he's in denial that there's even a systemic racism problem. There's no empathy, but there's also a denial of the problem, that you're not fighting for your people when you get there. I think that's been said about women as well. They get to the top and they're not fighting for women. I'm a man. They become a woman in trousers, in that sense of taking on a man's position without thinking about women, not fighting for women's causes. They're on their own career path.
I think, I'm pretty sure there will be a bit more still about it.
So I suppose that goes back to, what do we do to change that mindset? That's the question, isn't it? That's why we're here. That's what we're discussing, the whole thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Emma, when you say strong, how do you define strong? Like, what would you say is a strong woman? Like, what kind of traits would they express?
I think when I was saying that, I was saying the stereotypical expectation is that the woman, if we're going to compare and contrast vulnerability, you don't talk about your problems and you don't show your emotions. So that's what we define as strong man or strong woman. I suppose we've got that from, we would traditionally say that's a manly thing, not to show emotion, not to show vulnerability, and that it's expected that women do that. So if she doesn't do that, that's all I was saying by that she's stronger than us, or she's better than us, or something. Why don't we want a woman to look like that? Why does she have to show vulnerability for us as women to respect her? I was just questioning that, really. I don't know.
But showing vulnerability is a strength.
Yes, so it's not even the correct definition of strong, but that's how we've perceived it. Well, that's how it was spoken about, I think.
Yeah, but you have to make sure you should not feel that you have to show the vulnerability. The thing is, other leaders, men leaders, don't have to do that. People not going into past of people, they don't need people to be vulnerable, they're men, but they're expecting that of women. So it's okay to share vulnerability, but doesn't have to be. You don't have to feel that you have to do it to have a respect of people.
And I don't think showing vulnerability is a weakness at all.
It is not, but you understand what I'm trying to. I think I was reading there a little bit back. How Elder Tess was pointing at that Elder Jeff did not have to talk about his past. Elder Parmenter didn't have to do it. Gabriel didn't have to do it. People didn't have to. But of women, women feel like they have to do it, so they are accepted. Women feel in the leadership, women in the leadership, they feel they have to do it, so they are accepted. Does it make sense?
Are you talking from the movement's point of view, or from a political or
In
a
general.
worldly point of view?
In general, even in politics, if you see women being there and they're being not having this women like what people expecting from them, if they are like men in men's position, that's usually causing problems. That's usually when people don't like it. And yeah, that's the misogyny, because they're breaking the sexism, the stereotype. They're going against what, yeah, all this mindset.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I agree. I think my thought is that I think when we talk about men having those traits, I think we talk about it being problematic in terms of men being kind of men, the stereotypically manly traits. There could be a problem. If you look at Putin, for example, like what he's doing is being a stereotypical man. And so I suppose that, yeah, I suppose my thoughts on my question were like, shouldn't it be that instead of maybe women becoming like that, men should be required to be more vulnerable, to be less stereotypically male, because I suppose don't we look at those traits as not good traits? You know, these, you know, like Putin is showing his strength. He doesn't want to show any weakness. He doesn't want to show like, oh, you know, I made a miscalculation or whatever. So he's going on and making things worse and doing those things. Yeah. So I suppose that's what I was asking about, how we're defining strength and what it is, because I feel like sometimes maybe women shouldn't change, but the men should change. Does that make sense? So it's like, for example, like we're talking about Elder Jeff or Elder Palminda, they're not required to be vulnerable, but maybe they should be required to be vulnerable, rather than having this thing where everyone becomes like, you know, yeah. Anyway, that was just my thoughts. I don't know what you think.
Thank you, Tom. Emma, do you have some thought on that?
Tom, what would vulnerable look like from a man? An elder, leader, whatever.
Just whatever we're defining as the same vulnerability a woman would have to show to become whatever they feel they, whatever traits we're saying that I think women would feel that they need to display to be, I don't know, liked or accepted. I feel like men should be displaying those traits in terms of, yeah, just being vulnerable, being open to, I don't know when you talk about history, I don't know what that means, but just showing this kind of like being open with their weakness, if that makes sense, being open with their humanity, you know, being able to accept and then apologize and accept responsibility or whatever may be caring. You know, I think those traits are very good traits. You know that the same traits that Christ had, you know, as because Christ is an example, and Christ was not the definition of a strong man. In fact, even when I first became Christian, I had this problem because I felt like to become a Christian man, I'd be seen as weak in the eyes of the world. I'd be seen as a weak man. You know, in the world, it's like you have these strong men who don't show any emotion, who don't apologize, who don't, you know, kind of the typical, the stereotypical man. And so, yeah, so I feel like the traits that Christ had, that he'd show his, yeah, he'd show his vulnerabilities. He's caring. He had a lot of traits that we would stereotypically in this day and age say more feminine traits. If stereotypically, I'm not saying they are, but I think he's the definition of what I suppose we should be, but men included should be like that as well.
Yeah, there's definitely this toxic masculinity, which should be, yeah, which men has to work on.
Can I just comment on that? I think you just, well, what I'm seeing is I think you've just bunched a whole lot of things there together about vulnerability. I suppose the initial point that Magda made was about the woman having an eating disorder. which she would see as a negative, I guess a weakness, a sin, whatever, how you describe that. And I think that's what she's dealing with here. So I think there's separate things. I think showing emotion is one thing. I think talking about your weaknesses is another thing. I think apologizing is another thing. And those three are quite different things. So it would be very important from a Christian perspective to apologize when you've done wrong. You know, there's certain, and it would be, and it's not wrong to show emotion. Christ showed emotion, but we know he didn't go into his faults and failings because he didn't have any. So that there's, I think that's slightly different from, and the whole point Magda's addressing here is that women, is expected that women talk about their faults and failings, I think. And that's where, this is something I'm dealing with on a, you know, I'm on a course, and a lot of the women we struggle with saying sorry every time they speak. You know, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say this. And it's like this apologetic standpoint that we have to take to say that, showing our weakness and our vulnerability and apologizing for what we're saying, that we might be wrong, or that we might be rejected because we say the wrong thing here, or we say it in the wrong way. And I think that's the pressure that's on women in a different way from men. And I think that's the point that, and that many of us, because of our sexist viewpoint, we're still expecting women to behave like that. And if they're not apologetic and soft and gentle and meek and but soft and gentle is another set of traits. But yes, we should be caring, but what does that look like? And it's been embodied in a woman apologizing. And when we discussed it in the class, we were saying, you know, men never do that. They never get up and say, I'm sorry, I'm about to speak, I want to interject something. You hardly ever hear a man do that. And yet there's an expectation that women do that, and that's a negative thing. And I think it's negative to, and perhaps we could argue it's negative to talk about your faults and failings, that nobody should be doing that on one level. Obviously, it depends on the context.
Be unapologetically yourself.
Be unapologetically yourself, yeah.
If you're nice.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about what nice looks like either. But yeah, I think all that, I think we need to confront what our expectation is of the way women behave in those situations, the way men behave, and that's what we're talking about here. I think we've still got a very biased viewpoint about what's acceptable and what isn't, and how they should behave.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Emma. Yeah, there's, yeah. We need to, how much time do I still have?
How much time do you want? You can have, I think 10 minutes is official. I think you start at past, yeah, 10 minutes. But you can go over if you need to.
Okay, thank you. So I want someone who don't speak much to tell me the line of the priest, the Waymarks, please. So I will ask Debbie, if you're there and if you can speak.
1989.
Thank you. Okay. So 1989. Next one, please.
The 2001.
Thank you. Samoy, please. Where I am. It's a line of the priest. So the third Waymark.
(2014).
Thank you. Okay. Next one.
2019.
Thank you. And last one.
2021.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So let's carry on. Okay, so, and all of these people, thousands of them, all of those disciples, 12 of them, who thought Christ was coming as king, have systematically seen their hopes destroyed. And in the upper room, Jesus puts the last nail into the coffin. We systematically destroyed people's understanding of the kingdom. That was the climax of the camp meeting. That's Albert speaking, of course. We addressed the complete understanding of equality. For Judas, that was too much when he saw Jesus wash the feet of the disciples, when he heard the words of Christ, the message and the evidences of organization caused Judas to recognize that he was never going to see the fulfillment of his hopes, and he left. The same way Elder Jeff and FFA left. The midnight cry, people did not understand what we were saying. It was deliberately left back by God to streams of information. Ellen White says that if Christ had not have gone through the triumphal entry, he would not have received the attention that he needed to validate his mission. So he deliberately allowed people essentially to make that mistake and cheer him as an arriving king. It was needed to get the attention of the people, or they would never have listened. If we had come out at the beginning with the idea of equality and no Sunday law, no one would have listened. It is not truly understood until the upper room, and even not there fully. So so we see how people's hopes being destroyed. We saw that many people left. So in every Weimar, we have an increase of knowledge and formalization. So every Weimar is to inform and then divide into two groups of people. It creates concord in two groups of people, externally and internally. They're not coming together with each other, but with their ideology. So enemies of the movement come into the concord, and the movement does as well. So those support equality and those who attack in it. So at every Weimar, it creates two groups. So we always see the increase of knowledge. Everyone accepted it. So here it was the reform lines, and then it came to Daniel 11:40-45. When it always, so the formalization always requires change of behavior, but the increase of knowledge doesn't. So increase of knowledge usually people accept, but when it comes to formalizations and you have to change the behavior, the mind and heart, that's where people usually leading. So so we see that in every dispensation. So then Elder Tess was speaking about good streams and bad streams of information. So she went through some chart and talking about that. So I'm going to now, so I'm skipping loads of her stuff. As I said, it's like through 8 presentations. I'm trying to trace the kind of like one thought. So she's saying one thought about what we are doing when it comes to information. So one reason for media broadcast, so it is to share current events, but also because most of us grew up in this news source, many of us, if we would draw a square and put us at the bottom right, which is bad on facts with the right leaning. So we would basically be right leaning, reading wrongly, and that stuff. So that's where most of us been brought up. There is a real danger if we say we will only follow current events from top left, as its opposite side, than where we grew up. So it may help you understand one current event correctly, but we are hardwired like a computer. Even if we start taking in this left information, our worldview and perspectives, our very character is programmed for the bottom right of the chart. So it's not only to follow the current events, it's not the main reason, because we need breaking and remolding outside of evangelical worldviews. The way they manipulate history and suddenly devalue certain groups of people. So we are not just looking up into info, not looking up info on current events. We want to see information correctly, as far back as we can go, looking into what were the Vandals like, what is our perspective of the Crusades, because all of that can be influenced by right-leaning Christian nationalism. So yeah, so she's talking there about how we, no, let me carry on and then I will come back to it. So returning again to the subject of Apis bull. Just following current events from a good source is not enough. It will create the form, but not the character or the spirit. So this comes down to personal education, and this is the purpose behind the media broadcast. This is where frontline documentaries are very good. They can go back into past history and educate us. We won't have the right perspective of Black Lives Matter from just following current events from the left source. If we have been in the bottom right corner, we need to remake our thinking, going back 400 years of history, and much of that becomes personal work. But the failure to do that is one of the reasons we develop the form and not the spirit. So, so she is talking here about how, because we have this wrong mindset. So just to follow right, like today's events, it's not enough. We need to go and we need to educate ourselves. We need to go, we need to search for ourselves. To reshape our thinking, we need to, educate ourselves. So, someone would like to add something to that?
So are you saying that with just reading newspaper articles today is not going to do it? It's not going to recognize it. Will still be.
I would say Elder Tess was posting like old articles and all that stuff. It was not just today's event. It was as well, but not just that. It is what we should do, but because we need to change the way we think, we need to educate ourselves, so we need to read more about it, so we need to do research and we need to work on that. So I would say everyone should examine themselves, their thoughts and everything, and they see they have some problem, they should go and search about it, read about it. We need to create the right spirit, the right empathy. I don't know, does it make sense?
Yeah, would you say that's like when, I remember when she would share horrible things from the past or even from the present.
So
or anybody would post on the media broadcast, but I guess media broadcast is Elder Tess, we would post things about exposing racism, sexism, horrible things, stories of violence or abuse.
Yeah.
And she would use the term vaccinate. We need to vaccinate ourselves.
Yeah.
So is that the same principle that, you know, it's not enough just to know the current events? And I think many of us, we want to do that because we want easy answers. We just want the answer. You know, we just want to be told today, that's what the answer is. This is the right, this is the wrong. Let's just choose that. If we choose that, we've made it, you know, we passed the test, however we word that wording. And yet it's all about changing the mindset, which takes vaccinations, because, you know, the vaccination helps build the immune system of the body, just like these. I mean, this builds up a picture of how bad the racism is, or how bad the sexism is, how bad the sin is, to see where, you know, to really change our mindset and really believe that sexism is systemic. It's the sin of our time. To see it like that, we have to go back and look at the history of it, just like racism to slavery. We have to see how bad slavery was to really recognize. And many people are educated more on slavery anyway, so it's perhaps easier to see that one. But we have to do the same with sexism, otherwise our mindset will never change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. That, yeah. So
We need to watch
So,
videos
and that
of
goes along. Yeah, sorry, what you
You have to watch stuff like violent videos.
speak up? Can you hear it,
Is that what you're
Natalie?
saying?
yeah, I can.
I was just asking, does she mean we have to watch violent videos and abusive people being abused just so we're vaccinated? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think. Are you saying that? She's saying, oh,
Understand to it. So for understanding some topic, you have to go into it. You have to understand what is happening. You have to understand the wrong mindset, why people doing it. You have to. That's why we did get shared articles like about Max and that stuff, and yeah, about incel. They're very violent, and for example. So you have to understand to it. I think it's a piece of the puzzle to our message. You need to understand to this thing.
which is really quite confrontational, isn't it? I mean, we've said this before as well, that, you know, you can't just know truth or good by experiencing good and truth. And it goes along with, I was speaking to someone the other day, I think it was in the classroom at school, where someone was saying, you know, we need to know what good evil is to know what good is. And we've always taught, no, we don't need that. We just need to know the truth, you know, always taught in Adventism, you know, that you know, to know the counterfeit money, you just have to know the true money. And I think it's a shock to the system to think we have to look at the bad side as well. We have to actually do that to change our mindset, to know what the good is, because we're so dull of hearing that we see things so blinkered and wrong way, that we need to be educated in what evil is really.
Yeah, and that builds your empathy as well, I would say, you know, when you're seeing what's happening around you, when you're yeah. Anyway, I will come to that.
Sorry, I've got a question, Magda. You talked about this this box and the bottom right.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you just recap and you talked about the left. Could you just recap? Is it the one with 4 quadrants?
Okay, sorry. So thank you. That's where I didn't get proper context. So Elder Tess was showing a chart, and at the top left would be left, far left, like leaning, like wing, and right side would be
So would left be liberal, right be conservative?
so it was chart, it was separated on half. And you had there all this in the chart, you had there all these different sources, CNN, New York Times, and I don't know, all these different sources. So right bottom was the very right wing leaning. And I think it went from top to down. So yeah. So if you imagine, it was, I don't know if you will see it. Can you see it?
It's just slightly off the bottom.
Let me actually look at the camera. So let me take it here. Yeah. So there was a chart. It was separated in half. Yes. And there was put different type of sources like this. So this was left wing. And this was right wing. And I think what was the more up here, that was the true sources you wanted.
So is the top then, is there another axis like top to bottom, like factual, and because I think
Yeah,
you said using facts. So I think I remember this chart. I just wanted a bit of a refresher if you can remember what the top. So we have the left and right, which is like, I don't know. I'm assuming it's like conservative and liberal, and then top and bottom is factual and.
Factual. There is the emotional. You know how they train to.
Right.
I can try find it for you if you want. She was talking quite. Albertus was talking quite a lot about this. So
I'm assuming from what you said, then the top is factual, the bottom is emotional. Because if the problem was the bottom right, then it means it's right leaning, but it's emotional, not fact based.
I think it's both. It's factual and emotional, both together. So they did put kind of like, I can use the camera. Sorry, a second. So it was in general about the sources which are the best sources, and more it goes down, more it's emotional or wrong factors and that stuff. So if we were down here, that's the worst because it goes from the best down. So it would be right side, and it would be the worst sources you could watch. And yeah.
Okay, and so you said we want to be in the top left.
I think it was drawn like a curve, wasn't it? A bell curve. So it started at the bottom and then curved up like a mountain and went back down to the right. So it was, and you want to be on top of that mountain with the facts are highest and leaning to the left as opposed to the right. And if you're far left, conspiracy theories, they're right on the bottom at the left corner, and far right conspiracy theories are on the right, and they're both got emotions involved, but they're both conspiracy and not factual.
What, so you want to be in the top left quadrant, but towards the center, are you saying?
Yeah.
But we are not centrists.
So we're not centrists. Yeah, so we're further left than we are right. No, so I guess where she's drawn it, that's right. Yeah.
And I think she was mentioning like with charts, there is always a problem, a little problem.
Yeah, true. And then going into that, you have to discern the source, because not everything in the left quadrant would necessarily be completely accurate or true. So that's about sifting sources came later. Yeah.
But I can tell you exactly what presentation it is at, and you can go over it if you'd like as well. But I will have to find it later on. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. I just wanted to.
Does it make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for asking. Yeah, that's where I didn't add the proper context. So thank you. Okay. Albertus says, an example what I have heard over and over again in the movement is men suddenly or openly accusing us of the following. There is a board, for example, on it we have remade it, or someone has so there are 7 women and 6 men, and the men are coming up and saying, you don't practice equality. What is the underlying deepest fear behind white nationalism? This is Proud Boys, all of them. What is the foundation of white supremacy? You can have your culture, do what you like, be who you want, but don't replace us. So we're going into nationalism a bit now. You free black people, they have loads of you free black people, they have lots of children, and they will start replacing the white population in the USA. At one point, there were many Irish Catholics immigrants so afraid of replacing by Irish Catholics, and so they persecute them. People from Muslim countries, they can tend to have a lot of children. Putin speaks about the great replacement in Europe, destroying as the white Christian identity and culture. What they fear is replacement. It underlies white supremacy. And I wish I could show you how clearly it is demonstrated the way this movement underlines sexism. As men in this movement are afraid of being replaced in power structure by women. Men in the movement thinks equality looks like this. I am a man, I will move over a little and make room for a sister. In teaching in leadership, but I still expect to criticize and control. Then when you start saying that this is not equality, this fear rises up and it demonstrates itself in these comments. So if you have a, let me carry on and then I will come back to it. If you have a predominantly Black neighborhood in USA with Black school, you will find it like this. White school is up the scale and Black down. Now, if you had $50,000 to give to the schools, they will give 40K to the white and 10K to the Black schools. I am using this as a parable. We have 50K, 50,000. How would you divide it? The men would say, give the white school 25 and the Black school 25. This is still built on the same fear of replacement. The only way to make sure that someone does not become over you is try to keep your foot on their neck. So the complaints we get is, we do not do that. We do not practice that. Using the parabola, I would suggest 10,000 to white and 40,000 to Black until we get to equality. Equality, it is the only way to bring, so this is the only way to bring equality. When you have 6,000 years of oppression, the failure to recognize this, we see through sexism throughout the world. And it comes down to education. Okay, let's stop here. And we're almost done. So Alberta is speaking there about equality, and she's speaking there about how usually people want to free people, a certain group of people or something, but they are afraid that they will be replaced. So they okay to move a little bit. So they want to see it like 6 on one side and 6 on the other side, but it needs to be 9 on one side and 4 on the other side, or yeah, just example. Yeah, does it make sense?
So just the analogy of the, I think it was the schools. So you're saying that these people would split it, what, 50-50, 25 each, but then the right thing to do would be actually to fund one side more that's kind of been underfunded for a long time. Is that the,
yeah, exactly.
So the true equality wouldn't be like, oh, let's split it 50-50. It wouldn't be like 25-25. It'd be actually this group of people have been unprivileged for a long time, and so actually the right thing to do is, I don't know, I can't remember exactly if you use the figures like 40-10 or 45-5 or I don't know.
To bring them back to equality. And I realized I stopped too early because I realized I will come to this. So yeah, thank you, Tom. Is that clear so far?
Yeah, so I just wanted to maybe just clarify. So now bring this to the movement and women being in power. So is it that the men are saying, let's have it equal 50-50 men and women, but actually should be more women than men? Is that the?
Yeah, that would be not equality because of the oppression and sexism and everything what the women went through. If you hold on the question for a second, I will little bit carry on and then come back to it. If you, yeah, I think I should have there something a bit more about it.
Okay.
If that's okay, thank you. So it does come down to education. So after this, what I just was saying, and it comes down to education. They say we are in the left box, but it is the form and not the spirit, because even though the imbalance is so obvious, they have not educated themselves to see it and empathize with it. So, and that just goes into another example. So when in Uganda, there's 50 men and 10 women, and we say the front row is for women only, and not everyone gets to speak in class. And we are asking the questions directly to them. And if you're men, don't raise your hand. If you individuals say that is not equality. And the response is, we know we are not trying to practice equality. The inequality and suppression has been so bad for so long. Not that long ago, you had almost entire male schools. In some places, you have 100 men in the movement and 4 women. These 4 women are not going to get the equal amount of attention for men. We will practice affirmative action until the situation reaches equality. This is not an African problem or restricted to one part of the world. This is a European problem. You can see if Europe has a problem with the nationalism and racism, and it severely does. The two issues are inseparable. There is a reason why the racist group Proud Boys is men only, because you cannot separate racism and nationalism. We need not just follow current events, we need to educate. It runs deeper than many of us are willing to see in our own spheres of influence. And these comments demonstrate why we have the form and not the spirit. Women can do it to other women. When you see a couple divorced, the woman says, you don't understand. She is really bad with money, so the fault is equal. What should the response be? There is no excuse for abuse. And second, why are some married women in the movement not understanding how to open a bank account and budget correctly? It is because a lifetime of sexism and suppression. So when the thoughts are shared, she is not really good with money and carries the fault for that. Women can do this to other women. It is demonstration of the form and not the spirit. It is a lack of the vaccinating ourselves and educating ourselves, because entire purpose of educating is to develop empathy. You won't just say she is bad with money. You will look at who is her father, who is her husband, what was her society. You will start to see why she is bad with money, and you will recognize at whose door the fault lies, what failed her. These subtle perspectives that exist in Europe as well as everywhere else are demonstrations that we have the form and not the spirit, and not discounting prophecy and inspiration. They are not going to tell you how to respond to Romani people, but they will tell you what you need to do about your perspectives. And prophecy is saying we need to re-educate, not by just reading recent news, but especially to go back and re-educate ourselves away from the far right to develop empathy. So yeah, I will stop here. We're almost done, honestly. Tom, does it make more sense now?
Yeah, it makes more sense. Thanks.
Okay, so just to summarize what I've read now. So it's showing the inequality. It's showing how deep the sexism is or racism is, and the way it's pointing at the way we should thinking, where we should trace in it. Why are these things this way? It's showing how we should have the spirit, not only the form. So it's showing that we need to develop empathy. We need to have this understanding, and we need to develop the empathy. So we need to re-educate ourselves Okay. Almost done. So this is last bit. So when you deal with the issue of racism in USA, you go back 400 years and you see the way that this has developed. Ellen White makes a point. If white people look at Black people and don't like their practices, that think that some things they do aren't nice or good. Who is responsible for that? The white people are. The sin lies at their door because of how they have oppressed, divided families, segregated, and abused. You needed to take that same principle. It applies just as much in your own country with Muslims, with immigrants, and Romani. Ellen White would say, if she were alive, we may not like some of their behaviors. Where does the sin lie? Not with them. We need to look at these issues on our own doorsteps, not in USA. The same applies to many countries and indignations, populations, and to really understand that requires us to go back and to vaccinate ourselves with history. We can't just follow current events and educate ourselves, and vaccination has risks and hurts, but it is necessary. If we vaccinate, we will not get sick. What is the sickness? One word, and people were typing that. So inequality, conspiracy theories, Protestantism, Laodicea, social conservatism, idolatry, nationalism, how we read, misinformation. So that was answers of the people. Alberta says, it has been well answered. What are we vaccinating against? This is what we need to recognize and guide ourselves from in this history. And many of us have had education that makes them that even more necessary. There was an increase of knowledge, and you decide how successful you are. You follow and receive it. If you don't, it won't impact you. We don't just wait for things to impact us. It takes personal participation and personal effort to have personal success. So this upper room, it depends on yourself, whether you comply with the organization of the movement. Decide differences with the brothers and sisters, come into unity with the message and the methodology that creates the message. But it will not happen for everyone without their active participation in that. Yeah, I think we're at the end. Are there some comments or something? Okay, if not, we will close. We will close with word of prayer. Emma, could you pray, please?
Yes, let's kneel for prayer. Dear loving God, we thank you for this truth that you have revealed to us, that you are unfolding before our eyes. We pray that each of us would be able to have a changed mindset, that we would not let go of the idol, but hold on to the form in our minds. We pray that you would continue to change each one of us. Help us all in our struggles to be willing for that process, to make effort to change and to really embrace this subject of equality in our practical daily lives. Please be with us now for the rest of the Sabbath day. Help us to have close walk with you, fellowship with you, and hear you speaking to us individually. We thank you now, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Magda.